I'm sure, this moment. I know you didn't really come here for the ballpark tour, you wanted to know about retirement plans. But before I say that, you know, every time I hear my esteemed colleagues speak, it reminds me of how much of this stuff I don't even know. So, you know, when I meet with plan sponsors and employers, sometimes the first thing I say to them is, if you knew what you were responsible for when you installed this plan, you probably never would have installed this plan. And we may be having the conversation as to how to uninstall and unconstruct it by the time we're done all this. And listening to the ERISA attorney and the CPA and the insurer, I don't even know it all. So for you guys to know it all, and for you to be expected to know it all, it is quite a burden. It's quite a burden. It's a daunting task. I'm here to talk about retirement plan, the fees inside these retirement plans. But before I do that, I want to give just a little bit more background on why we're having this conversation, why we're talking about 408B2 and the fee disclosure law. And when I sit back and I think any advisors in the retirement plan space, there would be a general consensus that we've come to the conclusion that Congress, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that they are going to put the burden of retirement for the retirement plan workforce clearly on the shoulders of the employer. Because we think it's easier for them to do that than it is for them to fix Social Security. And the less the burden on the employees having to rely on Social Security, the less it will be underfunded. So we're pretty sure this is here to stay and it's not going away. Now, again, in their infinite wisdom, I think that what Congress is trying to do with 2006 Pension Reform Act and now 408B2 fee disclosure law is arm employers, give them the ammunition that they need, and in a lot of ways the relief that they seek when it comes to addressing these issues. So, the topics start with the background of the new fee disclosure law. And the fee disclosure law, as it is right now, is aimed to heighten the awareness of the employer as to what these fees are and where they are. Because ultimately, that's the first step in deciding if they're reasonable. The law has always stated that it's your responsibility to know if these fees are reasonable. Always. None of that's changed. The difference is that for years and years and years, there has been this perception that this is an unregulated industry. Not only by plan sponsors, but by plan providers, because the level of abuse inside these plans warrants that that's what they think. It's never been unregulated, it's just never been watched. And now it's being watched, and why it's being watched is because Congress is now going to put the burden on you. And the first thing they looked at is they said, is the 401k plan as a retirement vehicle faulty? Do we scrap it and start all over again? And in 2006 and 2008, there was a lot of reason to. But they came back and said it's not completely flawed, but there are two major flaws in it. One of them is that there is tremendous abuse by the financial services industry in the internal fees and the amount of money that is being made by those financial services companies off the backs of employers. Sometimes 2 to 3% through erosion of return gets paid to these financial services companies. When that 2 or 3% erosion of return gets compounded over 15 years, it costs American workers another 20 years of work to replace that loss of earnings. So internal fees, the biggest one. The second one is the fiduciary hot potato, as Ari had mentioned in his presentation. I'm not giving advice, I'm not giving advice, I'm not giving advice. It's the financial guy coming in and saying, here, Joe Smith, go take this home with your wife. You guys look through it, pick it out, turn it back in. And they go home and they say, ooh, 100% return last year, let me take that one. Ooh, 30% return, let me take that one. And then 2008 comes along and everything gets pounded. No one wants to give advice to the employees. Congress is saying there needs to be advice. There needs to be a reduction of costs. We're going to make the employer responsible for it, but we're going to arm that employer. So the first way you have to determine the reasonableness you have to be disclosed. It has to be disclosed to you. Enter 408B2, the beginning of what we feel is a transformation of what 401k retirement plans are going to look like over the next 5 years. So the new law basically provides more guidance to the existing law on whether fees are reasonable simply by disclosing them. All right, according to the law, any provider who receives, any provider of services who doesn't provide certain disclosures is going to be considered unreasonable, and therefore it's going to be eliminated, and some of the issues that were spoken about in the audit is going to apply. They are required to disclose. Anyone that's making more than $1,000 in fees for services rendered are going to have to disclose. July 16th, 2011 was the original date, as previously mentioned. That's now been pushed to January. One of the reasons is this is going to be a daunting task, folks. This is going to be difficult. The DOL knows it's going to be difficult. There's a lot of confusion as to how it's going to be done. So this is actually the second delay. There was a previous date. This is now a second delay. There might be a third. What will be expected of employers? Give workers quarterly statements of planned fees and expenses. Pat, you had mentioned not only will it have to be in writing in the beginning, but each quarterly statement is going to have to show how much has been deducted from the participants' accounts. Using standard methodologies when calculating and disclosing expense and return information, so there's uniformity across the spectrum of investments. Present the information in a format that makes it easier for workers to comparison shop among the plan's investment options, and give workers access to supplemental information in addition to the basic information required. We're going to have websites that are available to give them performance information, options, expenses, performance, all these things are going to have to be made available. How? We don't know yet. We have a pretty good idea, but they don't know yet. We know, but they don't know. All right, next slide. So they're going to be forced, where actually the two categories of information have to be provided come in two flavors. Plan related. Got to let everybody know what the investment options are. Clearly communicated. What the plan level administration expenses that are charged to the participants will be. 12B1 sub-TA fees. How many people here have ever heard of any of those terms? Couple. Okay. We're going to talk more about it in a minute. Quarterly disclosure of fees deducted from the plan participants' accounts. They're plan related. Now we've got investment related. Annual operating expenses at the fund level. Expense ratios, asset-based fees. Get used to hearing these terminologies, folks, because you're going to hear a lot more of them. Then, as someone asked earlier, how are we going to be, how can we determine the reasonableness? Benchmarking. Another term that will be widely acceptable shortly. And then performance information. The additional service provider disclosures. Descriptions of the services to be provided. All direct and indirect compensation to be received by that service provider. And then the unbundling. Bundling and unbundling refers to typically insurance company contracts. Ari had mentioned this earlier. Platforms that have always been perceived to be cost effective because of the economies of scale that they presented really were nothing but an opportunity for abuse. These bundle programs are now going to have to be unbundled. So the insurance company contract that you have, they're going to have to tell you, yeah, we do the record keeping, yeah, we're the TPA, yeah, we're the custodian. These are the charges we charge for each of those, and this is where it comes out of. That's going to be a byproduct of 401k fee disclosure. Fiduciary status. This was alluded to earlier by Don. This is still somewhat in the air, but what it's going to look like, and we're certain it will come to pass, is that people who say they are a fiduciary will have to say they're a fiduciary. People who are not a fiduciary will have to say they are not. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. No two ways about it. There's nothing in the middle. And right now, there's three types of fiduciaries. Ones that say they are, ones that say they aren't, and ones that pretend to be. That's all going to kind of get cleansed out over the course of the next year or two. Next slide. So let's talk about fees. The first step in gaining control of that of fees is understanding who gets paid and why. First is the investment provider, and they come in three flavors, folks. Insurance company contracts, Mass Mutuals, John Hancock's, Nationwide's, not picking on any one of them, just examples. Direct mutual fund companies, Vanguard, Fidelity, American Funds, AllianceBernstein, whoever. And then open architecture platforms. Okay? Three types. Basically, these fees on the investment provider level can come from a lot of different ways. There's expense ratios, there's asset charges, there's individual brokerage account, there's trading costs, there's all sorts of stuff buried into these type of contracts. So the first is the investment provider, insurance company, direct mutual fund company, or open architecture platform. Second is the TPA, or the third-party administrator, typically referred to as the TPA. Their role is to do the 5500 form, keep the plan compliant, do the trust document, sometimes help in plan design, sometimes not. All right, but they get paid. They can get paid a couple of different ways too. They can get paid as a flat fee, they can get paid as asset-based, they can get paid per participant, or they can get paid as revenue sharing coming from sub-TA fees. Sub-TA means transfer agent, and that encompasses a whole lot of different vendors. Another one, who gets paid and why, is, next one, is the record keeper. The record keeper does exactly what its name suggests. It keeps track of who John and Mary choose for their investments, how much they put in, whether it's a regular or a Roth contribution, is there a profit share, how much of it's going to be